Hi, everyone. My name is Moria Amit, and I'm the Senior Reference Genealogy Librarian here at the Center for Jewish History. Welcome to the final program in this year's Family History Today series, which has been our most successful yet. We've welcomed over 500 attendees this year. We might make it over 600 by the end of tonight. For those of you who are fairly new here, the Center for Jewish History provides a collaborative home for 5 partner organizations that together form the largest archive of the modern Jewish experience outside of Israel. The Center's Genealogy Institute, which is where I'm based, provides access to a wealth of genealogical resources through our databases, through our extensive reference collection, through a series of research guides that we've created on different topics in Jewish and general genealogy, and our referrals to relevant primary sources in the Center's partner collections. At the Institute, we strive to make family history accessible to people of all ages, abilities, and levels of experience, whether Jewish or non-Jewish. And we operate much like a public library. What that means is anyone can come in free of charge, without an appointment, and during our open hours, our skilled staff and volunteers are always on hand to answer any questions you may have or to orient you to our resources. You are also welcome to send us questions by email or call us during our open hours if you are unable to come in person. And lastly, we offer a variety of educational opportunities, including this monthly series of public programs, and free workshops for a wide range of groups, including groups from New York City schools, senior centers, and religious or other nonprofit organizations. So if any of you are interested in arranging for a group to come here, if you're involved in any particular organization that would like to do something like that, please feel free to reach out to me. For more information about the Genealogy Institute, including our hours and our contact information, please pick up one of our flyers at the table outside the room. And to learn more about our future programs, please visit genealogy.cjh.org/events. They're also always listed on our program calendars and program email blasts. I will also be around at the end of this program. If you have any questions about the Genealogy Institute, feel free to come up to me. So just a few policy things before we get started. Please make sure all of your devices have been silenced. This program will be filmed. So when it comes to question portions of this program, I will be asking all of you to please speak into a microphone if you're asking a question or giving a comment. And finally, photos of the slides are permitted at all times. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker tonight, who I'm very excited to welcome, a fellow library professional. Maggie Schreiner is the manager of archives and special collections at the Brooklyn Historical Society. She has previously held positions at NYU and the Queen's Memory Program at Queen's Library, which is where she first began teaching about personal digital archiving. Maggie holds an MA in Archives and Public History from NYU. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce Maggie Schreiner.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. I'm really excited to be here. Before we dive into the workshop, I just want to give a bit of background about who I am and where I'm coming from when I created this workshop and started teaching it. So I've been an archivist for about 10 years now. And I originally started doing this kind of digital work when I worked at the Queen's Public Library. So I worked in their community archives program, and I hosted events at branch libraries throughout the borough of Queens, where I worked with people to digitize their family photos so they could have digital copies that they could share with family and friends, and we would also include those digital copies in our archival collections at Queen's Library. So doing that work in Queen's and branch libraries is really where I started to do some of this teaching about what it means for us to care for our digital collections. We all know that we have our physical collections of papers and photographs, but learning the unique skills that it takes to care for the content that we're creating in the current moment. So just to give... No worries. Just to give a bit of an overview for what we're going to be doing tonight, we're going to be reviewing sort of what I call the 5 main steps of personal digital archiving. We'll be talking about what personal digital archiving is and what those steps are. We'll be sort of briefly looking at some more advanced topics, like what it means to archive your social media accounts, like your Facebook or your email, and how to digitize your photos or documents if that's something you want to do. You should all have a packet of handouts. So there's both a handout and some further resources. Does anyone not? Yeah, put up your hand if you don't have it and someone will get a packet to you. Yeah, it says My Collections on the first page with a chart.
So there's more than one or just one?
That's it. It's like three sheets of paper, a small packet. So during the first half of the presentation, we're going to be doing a lot of exercises and thinking about what our collection is. And then in the second half, it's going to be more of a lecture, and we'll be going into some of the technical aspects of the work. So as I'm presenting, I encourage you to ask clarifying questions. You can put up your hand and we'll get a mic to you. If you have big questions, like about a topic that I haven't covered yet, I'd ask that you hold those questions to the end and we'll address those separately. And just, again, with this kind of work, does anyone not have the handout? Okay, looks like we're good. Great. So just a caveat before we begin is that, everyone's situation is going to be very unique. We're all using different kinds of computers and different kinds of phones and doing different things with them. So we might not be able to answer every specific technology question that's coming up in the course of your work, but we're going to be looking at some bigger picture ways to approach this work and some of the tools that we can use to start finding solutions for how to care for our digital material. All right, so with that, we'll launch into it. So we're going to start by thinking a bit about how we all have different natural, personal, organizational styles, and how that's okay. So we're going to break down these 3 big categories and think about where we fit, or how many of these categories we fit into, maybe all of them, maybe none of them. So the first that you can see here is piler. So if you're a piler, you love your stuff, you keep everything. It's sort of loosely organized. You know where things are in your head. You don't spend a lot of time organizing or cleaning up. And in your digital realm, you maybe have a lot of stuff on your desktop and every photo you've ever taken on your phone. So can we just raise our hands if we might be a piler?
50%.
Yeah, so we got about half the room. Half the room are pilers. So filers. So you really like to keep things, but you don't like to be disorganized. You really like naturally to organize things and group them and put them away. Your closet looks like it might be in a catalog, and there's nothing on your computer desktop. So, or very little, very little. So can we raise our hand if we're filers?
50%.
Not 50%. I would say
I'm saying.
Oh. So we've got less than 10 filers in the room. Okay. And then the last one is spring cleaner. So if you're a spring cleaner, you're not super attached to your stuff. You like getting rid of things when you're done with them. You delete photos off your phone if you don't like them. And on your computer, you throw out you periodically go through and throw out the files that you don't need anymore or you're not using. So can we raise our hand if we're a spring cleaner? Almost none. So some people, I think, maybe have no organizational scheme yet. So this is something to something to think about, because I think as we go through this work, it's good to know sort of what our natural approach is, because if you're never ever going to be a filer, it's no good to just be like, I'm going to make myself a filer. You know, we want to work with what works for us and make it work a bit better and go from there. So that is to say, there's these different approaches. They're all okay. Know your strengths and work with them. So what is an archive? Since we're here to talk about personal digital archiving. An archive is an accumulation of relevant historical documents in the place where these records are located. So that might be in a building like this, in a museum. It also might be in your home, in your filing cabinet, or it might be on your computer. Archiving is the process that includes a number of practices and decisions that are geared towards the long-term preservation, use, and accessibility of content that you have deemed to have enduring value. So the above terms are relevant parts of the archival process, but require more components to fully encompass all the efforts behind archive and archiving. So this includes collection, a group of materials with some unifying characteristic from a single source, or materials that have been assembled by a person, an organization, or a repository. So your collection of photos on your phone or your important documents from your family history, those are your collection. Storing, which means to keep or accumulate materials for future use, and digitizing. So this is the process of converting something that's physical, like a letter on paper or a photograph that's been printed out, into a digital format that we can access through the computer. So what is archiving not? So it's not something that we can do just one time and then forget about it. It's not we put something on a shelf and just leave it there. It's definitely not putting our digital content on a hard drive and putting it on the shelf and forgetting about it. It's not creating one backup once. And it's also not hoarding. So we're going to go through all of these and figure out how we can take some actions to not do these things. So when we talk about personal digital archiving, what kinds of materials are we talking about? What materials might we have in our lives that we deem to be of enduring value that we would want to keep for the future? So this might be our family photographs. This might be creative or scholarly work that we create during our careers. It might be our bureaucratic documents that are important. It might be collections that we've developed based on our personal interests. It could be our correspondence. It could be home movies that we've taken of our family and friends. It could be websites that we've created, our social media accounts. It could be oral histories that we've conducted with our family members, and many other things.
Could you go back one slide so I can grab a picture?
Yep. Yep. So personal digital archiving is something that a lot of us don't know a lot about. And the technology that we use, our computers and our phones, they don't really help us with this project, this process. It's not demystified for us. So one of the reasons that it's important for us to come to spaces like this, and why I feel that it's important to teach this topic, is this is an area where we're using consumer products that become obsolete, and we really need to empower ourselves to care for the content we're creating. And why is this uniquely important for our digital content? So we know that our physical materials actually are quite stable. So if we have a collection of old photographs or old letters that we've put in a shoebox in our closet, we can reasonably expect that if nothing terrible happens like a flood, that we'll be able to go to our closet in 50 years and look at those photos and read those letters. They might not be as perfect as they were, but we're still going to be able to access the content. However, for our digital material, like our digital photographs and our emails, they require storage containers that they live on. So these are hard drives, CDs, thumb drives, phones, and we need these pieces of technology to access that digital content. And I'm sure, as everyone has experienced probably many times over, these devices fail regularly, and they have very short lifespans, and they frequently become obsolete. And in addition to those computers and phones and CDs and floppy disks becoming obsolete, also the file formats that we use become obsolete. So we're having to, migrate our content into new kinds of files that we can continue to open. So unlike our previous family collections of photographs and letters and documents, are the family collections that we're creating right now as we live our lives, which are digital collections, we need to learn new skills in terms of how to care for these in the future. So just to sum up, how many people in the room have files at home, digital files on their computers or on old hard drives that they can't access anymore? So a bunch of us. And then here's a few different examples of obsolete or on their way to obsolete storage containers for digital media. So you can see here, we've got some floppy disks, we've got a DAT tape, we have a CDR. As you know, like many new computers don't have CD drives anymore, so even though those feel like a recent technology, they're increasingly obsolete. So what happens if we don't care for our digital material? I think I've already mentioned some of it. But things that can happen if we don't take steps to care for these materials in the long term. Our content may be accidentally or deliberately deleted and destroyed. Our content may exist somewhere, but we might not be able to find it because we have so much and it's disorganized. Someone might be able to find our content, but no one can understand what it's about. Our content might not be sufficiently authenticated to use it as evidence. This might not be relevant to us, but it might be relevant to some people. Our content quality might become so degraded that no one can use it. So the files might be corrupt. Or our content might be in a format that we're not able to open those files anymore. So why do we want to archive? If all these bad things can happen, what's the point? So one is that we might want to have access to these materials in the future. This might be because we have emotional attachment to the materials. It might be because we know that they have historic or cultural significance. Or we might have legal or financial reasons that we want to retain this content into the future. And then also up here, there's a few other suggestions of reasons we might want to archive our work. Okay, so we're going to do a little participatory speaking section. So before we jump into the process of learning more about personal digital archiving, we're going to talk a little bit about what we're up against and what can go wrong. So there's a lot of complications and difficulties in taking care of our digital content. But I want to start from the place that we all make mistakes and we're all doing our best, and that's okay, and we're just learning about how we can improve and do a little better. So I just want everyone to take a moment and think about a time that you lost some digital content that was important to you, and just have a story that could be funny or sad. And if you want to, we'll take a moment to share a few of these stories, and then we'll absolve ourselves of these mistakes before we move forward. So everyone just take a couple minutes to think, and if you do have something you want to share, I'll prompt you to raise your hand and get a mic. Okay, we've got someone who's ready here at the front.
I just spent about 6 months this year. Digitizing most of the family albums. I had my mother's pictures. My mother was the family historian, and I had my own pictures. On the day I replaced my computer, I finished my digitizing. I was working day and night for months to put everything on the old hard drive, which I was going to take out of the old computer And I did it on the day the new computer arrived. I'm tormented over one thing. I did all of this. I mailed out pictures to people to whom the pictures meant something, and if they meant nothing to me. And my torment is that when I reached black and white photos, I froze. I can't do this. It was like black and white pictures from the 1930s and 40s are holy. They don't belong anywhere but on paper. So, give me some words of wisdom about this. What do I do? They're going to end up in dust.
We'll get there.
I can't digitize.
We'll get there. But for now, we're going to absolve you of that feeling. So we're just going to say, everyone together, and we're going to say,
Something to help this lady.
I mean, we'll speak
I
about.
still have the black and white pictures. Everything else is on a hard drive. I don't even want to touch them. They just have to be where they are.
Something to help you, maybe, if I can speak. My name is Isabelle Rosenbaum-Masson. I'm known as Bad Camera Art because I built a project about Jewishification in Lithuania in the interwar, in the high school where my mother was a student. So I traveled extensively to Lithuania and I acquired a collection that was in the Vilnius archives, 485 files, some of them containing 1,000 documents. And I began to digitize them on my website, badcamera.org. And it's a sacred work. It's a sacred mission because if it stays in the archives in Lithuania or even on the hard drive where I copied them, it's lost for history. So
It's trapped in the hard drive.
Yes. So it's so important to publish them. So I arrived to publish, 120 diplomas, and from the 51st files where there are thousands of pedagogical documents, I maybe published 120 also. It's not a lot, but that is visible for everybody, for you, and I don't think it belongs to us. It belongs to the future. It doesn't belong to us. So if it can help you to carry on with the work with this black and white documents.
Thank you. I think there was someone here who had a story to share.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. Mine is very, very small and personal. So when I first started doing family history, and there was kind of a big gap where I wasn't doing it, or just a little bit, there weren't word processors. There was something called a video writer. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it predates computers, basically. And so I did a lot of oral histories, and I had a format, which I still use, and I wrote out and transcribed the interviews and stuff like that. And I still have the tapes, and I'm still not sure because I just retired, and that's my, I'm gonna put everything in order. Most of the stuff is in order, but this isn't. I'm not sure. I know some of the files I put onto Word files, and they're current and they're accessible, but some of them I'm not sure whether they are. And meanwhile, I also moved from Massachusetts, and I'm not sure I have the video writer anymore. If I don't, then I am really in bad shape. And also it was on thermal paper, so some of the stuff starts to fade. So with the hard copies that I have, I know part of it's still there, and I know most of it I have, but I'm dreading wading into this mud. It's a very primitive, a video writer is the question, it's a very primitive word processor. It predates computers. So I'm betraying my age.
Thank you for that. So we're gonna, I'll say you're absolved on the count of 3. So 1, 2, 3. You're absolved. Is there one more story to hear?
Yes, 12 years ago I retired, and
Mike's coming.
I'm sorry, 12 years ago I retired. And before I retired, I had plenty of time at work, free time at work, so I started digitizing everything at work. And I figured I would spend the last day there copying everything and sending it through email to my computer at home. Well, I arrived at work the very last day and my boss said to me, "Go home, you're already retired and we've deleted your access to your computer." So I had to redo all of it at home.
Whoa. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, you're absolved.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like there's one more story here, and then we're gonna.
Well, excuse me, this actually happened yesterday, so I'm right up to date. My iPhone froze, presumably because of storage issues, whatever. So I went to the Apple store at 59th Street, where they have all the super experts, and I told them that I discovered that a lot of the space was taken up by texts and messages, which I hadn't realized, because my kids are all texting, so I have to text, But I said to them, one thing, whatever you do, I do not want to do is lose the text, because there is stuff there that I did not save. I only became aware of how to save the texts, after I started using them, etc. 2 hours later, when they had restored my phone with new software that updated it and gave me more space, they had deleted all the texts. And now I have an iCloud backup, and although they apologized and told me to go to a tech store downtown in Chelsea that's an expert and all that kind of stuff. So suddenly I see I have X number of gigs of messages suddenly in my iCloud that didn't appear before. Perhaps it migrated there in some fashion. But could I have done something about it? I think if I knew a little more about the process of saving texts, I certainly would have taken some videos and photos that come via texts and press the save button so to go into the photo button. So that's an example of where a whole file can be lost in a second.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna do a 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. You're absolved. All right. There's a question.
We do.
If you have hard copies, like of old black and white photos, you can buy archival plastic folders from photo companies around the country on the internet, and you can put the address free.
Oh no, I have millions of
Yeah,
those.
but I make albums. I have 17 albums of pictures from 1917. I mean, it's
My
okay.
whole point was that I wanted no more paper,
And you
but I
can't see-
came up against a brick wall with the black and white.
Okay,
So I think-
we'll be moving on now.
So now we're gonna jump into the next portion of the workshop, where we're gonna review the 5 steps of personal digital archiving. So you can see them listed here. We'll go through them one by one. They are identifying what materials you have, deciding what you need to keep, importing material from all your devices, organizing and describing the materials, and then storing those and creating backups. So the first thing we're going to talk about is identification. So you want to identify the scope and quantity of your collection. And some of the questions you want to ask yourself to help figure out what you might have in your collection are, what do you have? Where is it stored? How much? Do you have 100 photos? Do you have 5,000 photos? Can you access the material, or is it on historic something that I'd never heard of?
Before you were born.
What condition is the material in? Is any of this material confidential or sensitive material? Are these records that are active records? You're actively using them and opening those files regularly, or are they non-active? They're something you want to keep, but you're not actually looking at it very often, if ever. So when we think about type and function, our archives have different kinds of functions and different sort of broad groupings of material that I'm sure we all know as we organize our computers and our hard drives. So we might have groupings of family photos, we might have groupings of home movies, we might have groupings of official documents. We can figure out some of these groupings based on where they originated. whether they originated from ourselves or our family members, organizations that we interact with or have worked for or volunteered for, or material that we might have collected or downloaded from the internet. We also want to think about what formats our materials are in. So we have what we call physical formats. So these are, our floppy disks, our hard drives, our SD cards, and our digital cameras. And then we also want to think about file formats. So we might have PDFs, we might have JPEGs, we might have movie files. So these are all the sort of questions that we want to be asking ourselves when we're thinking about the scope, whatever the scope is of the collection that we're working on. So we might be only interested in really improving how we're storing our home movies or our family photographs, or we might have a larger scope of material that we want to be looking at. We're going to skip this one.
Thank you. Thanks.
So we're to think about what our collections are and what collections we want to work on, and think about personal digital archiving. We're going to do a short exercise. So in the handout that you got on your way in, the first page should look like this, and it says My Collections. And you're going to take a couple minutes, and you're going to look through the worksheet, and you're going to try and fill in one of the rows on the worksheet. So you're going to think of a personal collection that you want to archive, and then answer these questions, such as so we're going to answer who the creator is, if the formats, what they are, where they're stored, approximately how many, whether you can access them or not, or if you know the condition, whether any material is confidential or sensitive, and whether they're active or non-active records. So everyone's just going to take a couple minutes and do that on your own. And if you don't have a pen with you, I would just think about it, and you can definitely bring this worksheet home, and when you are more able to sit down with your materials, it's a useful tool for thinking about what you have.
Question. Stupid question maybe. What does active versus non-active?
So the question was clarifying what active or non-active means. So if your active records, that's something that you might continually go to on your computer or phone and open and use. Non-active is like perhaps a photograph that's really important to you, but you only look at it like every 5 years. But you definitely want to have it, or every 10 years. Yep.
What if you're in a situation where you want to create digital archives from your hard copy items?
You can include that. Yeah. So the question was if you want to create a digital archive from your physical collection. So you can totally use that as one of your examples.
Isn't it individual to decide if something's confidential or sensitive with all the privacy issues out there now? You want to be posting your grandmother's birth certificate, you know what I mean?
So there was a question about confidential or sensitive records. So this would be something that you would want to consider if you were going to make them publicly accessible. You might not want to share like private information like birthdays or banking information or anything like that. But if it's something that you're going to keep to yourself or to your family, you probably don't have the same sort of concerns around privacy.
I have some documents that go, the family things that go back maybe 100 years, and I have no heirs, so I was thinking of donating them here.
We're going to talk about that at the end of the workshop. Yeah. All right, it looks like people are wrapping up. Does anyone want to share one of their examples?
Well, I put down my family photos that I've digitized. And the creator, the source of the collection is me and others who took the photos, I would say. The formats, I saved everything in a 600 dot per inch TIFF and also in a 300 dot per inch JPEG, so I can share them. They're on my computer under the heading of genealogy, and then subheadings under that. The photos are various size, and I have thousands of them. I'm able to access them, yes, the condition is good. They're not confidential or sensitive, and they're active because I use them all the time, and I'm trying to identify some of them.
That's a great example. Does anyone else have another example that they'd like to share? There's someone at the back? No, yeah.
It's nothing that's digital, it's what I'd like to figure out how to save them. So, that's not true. One is an old, like 30-year-old plus VHS, VHS-C tapes. The last time I looked at them, some of them already had some static sections on them. So I don't look, I'm afraid to touch them. I don't know if they're still good, but then my kids when they were little, and I'd love to salvage or know what to do with them.
So I think that's a great example. So an example of a VHS collection.
Right.
So I would say, yeah, that is definitely within the scope of what we're going to be talking about. And in your handout, I'll talk about this again later, but since it's come up, I've listed a variety of resources specifically for digitizing video. So both resources where you can go to the public library and digitize VHS yourself and like learn how to do it. And then I also listed, if that's not of interest to you to learn how to do it, I also, from VHS to digital. And then I listed some libraries where you can do that. And then I also listed several vendors who will do that if you don't want to do it yourself. But we'll come back to that again later in the workshop. Thank you for those of you who shared your examples. So the next step, step 2 of our personal digital archiving process is deciding what to keep. And I like to call this Marie Kondoing our digital life. So we should all be really good at this now because we've watched a lot of TV about it. So we want to think about when we're thinking about our archives, and we often have a lot of material, we need to decide what is what we say in archives of enduring value. So I've listed some questions here that sort of help us think about what is important to us and what are the materials we really want to prioritize for taking all these additional steps to like digitize our VHS tapes or save different documents that we have on our computer. So is the material a memento of a person, place, or an event? Is it something that's unique or difficult to replace? Did we work really hard to create this item? Who created it or where did it come from? Is that significant to us? Is it something that's really old or has value as an artifact? Does it have research value or historic value? Is it something that has monetary value? Is it something that's of very high quality, something we created that's beautiful, that we're proud of? Are we legally or financially required to keep this item for some reason? Or is it something that is just really useful for us to have? So those are sort of some of the questions that we can ask ourselves and some of the factors that we might use to decide whether something is valuable or important to us. So our behavior towards materials, including our digital materials, can also be sort of an indication of how much we value it. So if it's not easy for us to just think about it and decide, we can think about how we use it. So things that are valuable to us might be things that we access a lot. It might be something that we've saved in multiple places. So it might be something that we've emailed to our friends and family, or to ourselves. It might be something that we have saved on our computer and in our Google Drive and on our phone. It might be something that we've made an effort to make identifiable and findable. So we might have filed it in a folder that we've named carefully. Or it just might be something that we've held on to for a long time, whether that's a digital item or a physical item. So turning it again to our packet, we're going to do another activity. And this is a short exercise to help you think about how much you value your collections and the material in them. So we're going to think about both the conscious and unconscious factors that we just discussed. So on your worksheet, you'll see there's 15 sample types of content. I'm going to ask you to just pick 5 that feel relevant to you, and you're going to plot them on the graph. So you're going to plot whether it is something that is of high value or low value to you based on the factors we were discussing, and whether you anticipate that it will be of long-term value, so it's something you'll still really care about in 20 years, or whether it's of short-term value.
Are there any more copies of the handout?
No.
I took 2 by mistake.
Oh.
Oh. I think one's coming to you.
Everything is important to me, everything I want to keep, and everything I want to pass on.
Okay. So then they're all in that top right corner. Yeah.
As I said, a lot of my things have extremely high value to me, not monetary value, but for the future, and like I said, my things are gonna turn to dust. So I'm willing to take these things, donate them someplace that will value them the way I do, someplace like this.
So I think you can plot that on your graph, that they're of long-term value. All right. So it looks like people have taken a moment to plot things on their graphs. Did anyone have, well, it sounds like someone did have a particularly easy time plotting things on the graph. Everything was of high long-term value. But did anyone have trouble thinking about where to plot these items? Super easy for everyone. Everything's high value.
Returns, you can get rid of those in 5 years.
So the example was tax returns. That's something that is perhaps of high value in the short term, but of low value in the long term. So that's a great example.
My Facebook page has no value and no long-term value.
All right, so if we do have any gray area where we don't know how to plot it, which it sounds like maybe no one does, but I suspect actually when you dive into the work that some gray zone material might come up. Some things that you might want to think about for ambiguous material and material you don't know what to do about if you're cleaning up your hard drive or your desktop. Some questions that you might ask are, did I intentionally collect or create this originally? Have I actually accessed it frequently? Do I need to keep it now? Is there someone who's better able to preserve this than me, or more appropriate to preserve this item? So in the case of your tax returns, maybe someone else is more appropriate to preserve those. And then from Marie Kondo, I like to also add, is this something that I want to take into the future with me? So as you're doing this work and you do encounter materials that you don't know whether you want to retain them or not, these are some questions that can guide your thinking through that. And also, if you do encounter a grouping of materials that you're not sure what to do with, it's totally okay to sort of set those aside to deal with later. So now we're moving sort of into the more technical portion of the workshop. So this will be, we're done with the exercises. Perhaps that's a relief to you, but this will be much more of me just talking at you. So if there is anything that you need me to stop and clarify, please raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. But step 3 of our personal digital archiving process is importing your content. So as we've already sort of learned from some of our conversations, we have content that's all over the place. It's not just sort of on our computer. We might have content that's on our phones. We might have content that's on VHS tapes. We might have content that's on flash drives or other kinds of media that are easy to access or difficult to access now. So we want to import our content into a central location so we can better manage that like from our laptop or our desktop computer. So when we import material, we want to make sure that we're importing the highest possible quality of file, so the highest file size. This will be the most functional and most authentic copy of the material. So I've included an example of a screenshot for what pops up if you, for instance, email yourself a photograph from your iPhone as an example of the different kinds of sizes. So you can see here, it gives you an option of small, medium, large, or actual size. So in this case, you would want to select actual size. So the other decisions are actually going to give you a file that's of a lower quality. So if you're transferring this to your computer, you want to make sure that you, or even if you're emailing it to a friend, you want to make sure that you're emailing like a robust file. In the case of Androids, if you're an Android user, this is not a setting that you get per email. It's a setting that you're going to go into the settings of your phone and make that selection. So probably it's not going to make sense for you to transfer your content around by emailing yourself off your phone. You're probably going to want to plug your phone into your computer and directly import those photographs or videos from your phone. So you'll want to transfer through a hardware interface, so that's going to be a cable. So most likely you're going to be using a USB cable, and you're going to want to make sure that you have something that's compatible with your phone or your digital camera. So if you have a digital camera that's not your phone, it will have come with a cord to connect to your computer. Your phone may also, so this photograph shows a SD card from a digital camera, and if you do have that and you're wanting to import material, you'll want to go with that option, which will be faster than using the USB cable. So once you've connected your device, whether that's a phone or camera, you're going to have options about how to import the material. The best option that you're going to want to use, which is also the easiest, if you're using Windows, you're going to use Finder or Windows Explorer, and this allows you to just copy and drag your files onto your computer. So this gives you a lot of control over where your photographs are going, and it doesn't make any changes to the quality of the materials. A lot of computers might also, and cameras and phones might also have software that they want you to use a software interface to import your photos, but that's going to give you a bit less control over what's happening to them. So this is just very direct. If you're on a Mac, you're going to have to use image capture or iPhoto, depending on the age of the Mac you have. And this shows how it will render on your screen.
Don't change it, please.
Oh, okay. And this is the same sort of setting screen that you might have if you have a Windows or a PC. Okay, waiting for a sec. Everyone's got their photos? Okay. So we're going to be talking, if we have content that's like on a VHS or something that needs digitized, we'll be talking about that later. But for now, we've centralized sort of all our existing digital content onto our computer, and we're going to think about how to organize and describe this material. So in the digital sphere, organizing and describing our material means how we name our files and folders, how we arrange folders into nests, and how we handle the files in the folders. So when deciding how we're going to organize our collection, we probably don't need to start from scratch. You probably already have ways to organize your material that are a good starting point for your organizational scheme. So I would encourage you to not sort of think about what's best or what's most professional, but go with what you're naturally doing and naturally inclined to do to do or to organize. So I would suggest thinking about common ways that you look for content. So this might be, do you care about location of your photographs? It might be the title. You want to see the title, or you might want to know the year or date, most importantly. So you're going to organize the materials the way you use them. So if you're always like, I want to see this photograph from 2012, it probably makes the most sense for you to organize your photographs by date. But if you want to always see a photograph from XYZ vacation, you might want to organize them by place. There's a question here.
Well, what do you think about using an online service for that kind of organization? For example, both Flickr and Google Photos can sort photos by date.
So the question was about using an online service. We're gonna get to that a bit later. But for now, we're talking about our files on our computers. But we will talk about those services in a few slides. So when you've decided on how you want to organize your collection, one of the most important things you can do is be really consistent. So I have a couple examples here where on your left, I've organized content by type. So we have audio, photographs, videos, and documents. And then on the right, we've organized content by year. So you just want to pick a method and stick with it. You'll also want to decide on a broad scheme for naming your files. And again, this is something that you should pick what you're naturally inclined to do and maybe refine it and then use it consistently. So I would suggest using descriptive keywords. You want to keep it short. You don't want really, really long descriptive titles for your files. You want to use dates. People often say that we should do our dates like year, like 2019, month, 12, day, whatever day it is, 12, I think, 11. But I would say, if you're like, totally, I'm gonna always write the date with the year first, go for it. If you're like me and you're like, I don't think about dates, year, month, day. I think about the dates December 11th, 2019. You should do that. You just wanna pick a method and use it consistently so you know what to expect when you're looking for material. So I have some examples here to show how this kind of naming scheme might work and the ways in which it can help us find our content really easily and understand what it is quickly. So I have this photograph here, and it's called Maine 2014 0812, and then they're numbered sequentially. So we can really quickly see that this is a photograph of Maine and that it was taken on August 12th in 2014. So this is a case where I had a simple file naming convention, and it enables me years later to quickly understand what this is and know that I was in Maine in August 2014, which definitely I wouldn't know otherwise. So again, you want to pick something that works for you and be consistent. Some other suggestions, depending on how you're using your digital files or the kind of work you're doing, is adopting what we call a version control system. So if you're producing a lot of drafts of something, you might want to just name them like V1 for version 1, V2 for version 2, and this will enable you to keep track of where you're at. I also like to say that we should use like final very sparingly. Things that are things that we think are final often aren't. So yeah, save that word for like when you're really, really done. And then finally, you want to delete files that aren't important. So if you do have your final version and you're like, I have 10 copies or 10 previous drafts and I'm definitely never going to go back to draft 1, potentially you don't need to keep that and you can throw out that file. So things to avoid. As I mentioned, you don't want really long file names. One, it's just annoying to look at on the computer if you have really long file names. But also, depending if your file name is very, very long, it can throw errors in your backup system or copying the files if it's beyond like a certain number of characters. And you'll also want to avoid like special characters and spaces in particular. They can create problems if you're moving between computing environments.
What is the problem with
Some people, sometimes capital letters like don't play well with computer systems, but capital letters are more okay than, yeah, better than special characters. Yeah. All right. So then in terms of file format, so this is what we were talking about earlier. These are our PDFs, our JPEGs, our TIFFs. So there's different kinds of file formats and sort of broad groupings. And we like to encourage people to use what are called open file formats. So some file formats are proprietary or confidential file formats. So these are formats that are created by a company, and those formats only operate in their operating systems. This might be something that you can only open in one place. So if you have a camera, it might take like a file format when you look at it on your computer that looks strange, and maybe it doesn't open in Photoshop. So these are cases where the company has created this file format and they haven't like published sort of all the code behind the file format. And this basically increases the chance that in the future, if the company ceases to exist, you might not be able to access that file at all. There's also formats called open standard formats, and these are cases where the code behind that file is published, it's widely available, it can be recreated. So even if a particular company uses this file format and the company ceases to exist, other companies will be able to use that code so you can open that file. You can look, if you have a weird file format, this is something that you can just look up on Google. If it's proprietary or not, but many of the file formats that we use are open, but if you're a photographer or working with a lot of video, this is something that you might want to think about, like a photographer, not a camera photographer, like a phone, not a phone photographer, like if you're using. So it's just something to keep in mind, a little more technical, it might not be relevant to everyone.
PDF, I mean, it's Adobe.
Yeah, so
Is it open?
some PDFs are, some kinds of PDFs are, and some PDFs aren't. But there's a kind of PDF called PDF-A. It's often an option, and those are like that's a published file format.
PDF expert is not open.
PDF.
Expert.
I don't know the details of that exact kind of PDF, but you could look it up. But yeah, I encourage people to use PDF-As if it's something that you for sure want to be able to open like in 50 years. PDF is such a widely used file format that it's not like we're not going to be able to open. We're going to be able to open PDFs in 10 years. But we're sort of like, when we think about these, we're thinking about, from my position as an archivist, like I'm thinking about whether we're going to be able to open our digital files like in 100, 200 years. So that's kind of where that's.
Audacious.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't understand what PDF-A is. I never saw that.
It should be, it's often an option like in the export.
Oh.
It's not like standardly used, but it's what we use like in the archival profession. So this was just for fun, an example of some obsolete file formats, many of which I'm too young to have ever used, but maybe familiar to you.
Word Perfect 5.1 was my favorite program.
I do remember Word Perfect, but those you can open in Word. All right. So just a few more technical points. Something to be aware of, again, this might not be relevant for everyone, but if you are working with photo collections, it's probably relevant to you, is file compression. So compression is something that your computer does to save storage space. And there's different kinds of compression. So there's something called lossy compression. And this is where when your computer compresses the file, it actually like throws out part of the file. So it's throwing out some of your data. And over time, like over a long period of time, this could lead to like the degradation of your photographs, because every time you resave it, it would throw away some of that file. Then there's also something called lossless compression. And this is a kind of compression that's algorithmic, and the computer is not actually throwing away data. So if you are working with photo collections, you definitely want to be aware of how much you're compressing your photos, especially if you might be editing them or resaving them. It's something you want to be aware of. So I have here an example of a JPEG save window. So this is a case where when you're saving a JPEG, you actually are given the opportunity to select what level of compression is being applied. So JPEGs, it's a lossy compression, so your files are getting smaller because the computer is throwing away part of the file. And you have that slider option when you're saving the file. So if you drag it all the way to the right where it says that you want a large file, that also means that it's throwing away the least material. If you dragged it all the way to the left to get a small file, it would definitely over the long term lead to the loss or degradation of quality of that image. So that's something to be aware of if you're working with a photo collection and saving it a lot. If you do have photos that you definitely want to make sure they're in great quality for a long time, I would encourage you to save them as TIFF files if you have that kind of storage space. It is a lossless compression, so no data is being lost during the process.
I have a question about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to understand when that would come up. Did that come up? Let's say I take a photo on my phone or a digital camera.
Yeah.
It takes it in a format.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure what I'm trying to say. The phone will take it in a specific format, or the camera will take it in a specific format. When might this come up?
When would you see this? So the question is, when does this compression question come up? So this would come up if you are editing your photo on the computer and resaving it. If you're dragging and dropping it around your computer, that's not going to change it.
For example,
What?
I'm cropping a photo.
If you're cropping the photo and saving as, this will come up. So you'll see this JPEG window.
So the next question is, at that point, after I've done that, let's say I've said, okay, I'm going to save it in this particular manner. If I then copy it somewhere else, or resave it onto another device, I'm assuming, because I'm not editing or anything like that, there's no further loss?
So the question is, if you copy it if you're copying it, there wouldn't be any further loss, but if you're resaving it, if you're opening that save as window, that's when the data loss would occur. Yeah.
No changes to the file?
Yeah, because it's just reapplying the same sort of algorithm. All right. So we're going to move on and talk a little bit about metadata, which I like to describe as essentially data about data. So metadata allows us to organize our stuff, it allows us to find things, and it allows us to understand context. So I've provided sort of a classic example here, which is a catalog card. So this is the metadata that represents a book in a library. Or potentially another object. So we can see that we can learn a lot about the book just from this set of metadata. So we can find out the author, we can find out the publisher, we can see the number of pages, and we can see the call number, which means we know where to find it in the library. We've learned a lot about this item just from this. We haven't gone to look at it yet, but we've already learned a lot about what this item is just by looking at this information. So you're going to need to decide when you're working with your collection what kinds of metadata or what kinds of data about your materials are going to be useful to you. So you might want to, I would suggest as a starting place for this thinking, probably the creator of the item is important to you, who took the photograph or video or wrote the letter. It might be important to have a caption or further description. The date is probably important. The file format might be important to you depending on what it is. If it's a movie or an audio clip, how long it is or the duration might be important. And then the location could be important, such as where you took a photograph or a movie, where the letter was written from. And in some cases, particularly if you are thinking about the possibility of donating your materials to an institution like CGH, it might be important to know the copyright information, like who owns this collection. Did I buy this collection like at a vintage sale or yard sale, or is this something that I created or my ancestor created? So how can we capture metadata? So we can capture metadata in a bunch of ways. Our camera settings, like on our phone or on our digital camera, they capture a lot of metadata about our photograph. So I've included an example here. We can see, it might be too small for you to see, but it tells us what the file format is. We can see it's a JPEG. We can see where it's saved. We can see what date it was created on March 3rd, 2012. We can see that I took the photo on a Canon PowerShot. And we can see a timestamp actually of when I took the photograph at 3:52 p.m. So we can see a lot of information just from this metadata that the camera has created. But we also might want to capture additional metadata that we're adding to the files. So this might be through the file names that we've decided on how we're going to name them. So like main 2012, whatever it was. We might want to create a spreadsheet of our materials with additional information. We might want to use cataloging software. Maybe we're using something online, our Flickr account, or we might want to embed our metadata directly into our photographs.
Can you explain, give me one example of embedding metadata? Is that putting in keywords?
So we might want to put in keywords. That's a great example. We wouldn't, so this is not, so often there's like softwares that you can use where you might embed metadata. So in Photoshop, you can embed metadata into your files. You know, it's something that you would do like image by image. And I would just say you would want to do, if you're going to use software to sort of embed these keywords or tags into your files, you just want to do a little research because you want to make sure that it's actually adding it to the file. Some softwares sort of adds it, it's kind of like Facebook, like it might sit beside the photo, and if you downloaded it, your work might not be there anymore. So you just want to do some research and make sure that when you're exporting your photo from whatever system you're using, those keywords and additional information that you've added are going to export with your photograph. Okay. So now we're going to talk about storage. So at this point, we've done like a ton of work. We've figured out what our collection is, what's in it. We've gotten it all in our computer. We've named all the files, like beautiful, simple things. We've put them all in folders that are nested. But now we need to store and we need to back up our material. So when we're thinking about storage, there's a few things to consider. What kind of expertise do we have? Like, are we someone who's really comfortable with computers? Are we not comfortable with computers? What kind of support do we have? Do we have like a bunch of people around us who are really comfortable with computers and can teach us what we need to know? Do we just have one friend who's really busy who can help us? We want to think about the size of our collection. Do we have a bunch of videos and we have like 20 gigabytes of material? Do we have a few hundred photographs that we've digitized that's like a smaller amount of material? We might want to think about how often we want to access the collection we're working on. Is it something that we're going to access once a week? Is it something that we want to access every couple of years? And we also want to think about whether other people need to have access to this collection. Is this something that we want to save in such a way that everyone in our family can access it? Or is it something that's private and actually we want to be the only people that are accessing it?
Excuse me, what is throughput? Throughput, what is that?
Throughput.
For example, availability.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember. I made this slideshow a long time ago.
Oh, okay. Right.
It's obsolete.
Yeah.
Probably is.
Old format.
Need an old dictionary.
So, basically, when we think about our different options for storage and backing up, there's sort of no best solution. We're gonna have to figure out what works for us, and we're gonna have to think about the advantages and disadvantages and lifespans of each of the technologies that we employ, because everything that we're employing, again, is gonna be like the same sort of consumer device, hard drive, or system, that is going to become obsolete, and we're going to need to sort of stay on top of it and continue migrating our content, and really caring for it actively into the future. So some things to think about when we're choosing our storage format are what we can afford. And this includes not just like our original purchase of a hard drive, but they do, again, become obsolete. So it's something that we would need to potentially purchase every 5 or 10 years. So something we can both afford to buy and replace. And it also has to be something that we are comfortable like using and managing that device. And then again, we would need to choose something that would meet our capacity needs. So if we do have a 20 gigabyte collection of videos, we would need to choose something that can store 20 gigabytes of material and allow us to access that.
How long does optical data hold up? Does it hold up forever, or does the disk eventually lose the data?
We're gonna get to specific formats, including optical soon. And then in terms of creating backups, what we consider best practice is that we keep at least one backup on a separate device. So we would have both our computer and a separate backup, but ideally we would have our computer and 2 backups. And one of those backups would be in a different location. So we wouldn't just have our computer and our hard drive in the same room, but we would have a separate backup that's in a different physical location. And we'll talk about some of how we can achieve that. So we're also going to need to, when we're planning for storage, anticipate our needs. So if we're actively digitizing a ton of photographs and video, we're going to need to figure out a storage solution or buy a hard drive or figure out a cloud storage system that doesn't just allow us to store what we have now, but will allow us to store the content that we've created like in the next 1 or 2 years as our collection grows. So we need to anticipate that. We need to know that we are able to move materials in and out of our hard drive. So we need to know that we can add content as we're creating it to our hard drive, or whatever backup system we're choosing, and that also we can get the content off of that system. Again, we need to plan to replace these materials, because these drives or devices, because they do become obsolete. And we're going to want to do, as usual, research before we would make any decisions. So getting into the specific options, the first is probably the one that we're most familiar with, which is a portable or external hard drive. So this is, they're increasingly very affordable. Unless you're working with really large video collections, you're probably looking at $100 to $500 to sort of store your collection. Again, this is, you would want to, before you purchase one, you might want to look at the reviews to make sure that the drive you're purchasing has strong user recommendations. Disadvantages to hard drives are if you have a huge photograph collection or a huge video collection, you might need to purchase multiple drives or purchase very large, expensive drives. That may not be relevant to many of us, but it would be relevant for some people. It also, drives are formatted to either work on PCs or Macs. So if you're moving between a Mac and a PC often, a hard drive might not be the best option for you. It could still work for you, but it would require more setup and a bit more knowledge to manage that. And then again, many hard drives are actually, the drives physically spin, so they're spinning drives, and they need to be exercised. So if you just put your hard drive on the shelf for a long time and never use it, it's possible that when you plug it in, the drive will like physically be unable to spin. So it's something to keep in mind. If you have a hard drive, plug it in. Optical media. So these are CDs and DVDs. They're often used as storage media, but archivists and professionals, so we really don't recommend optical media as long-term storage devices. It seems that they're much less stable than we originally understood. Optical discs are manufactured with dyes, and those dyes fade over time, and when the dye fades, the information that was stored on that disk is lost. So we currently think that these disks have a lifespan of about 20 to 25 years. So that means the CDs and DVDs that we created sort of early in this technology are probably reaching the ends of their lifespans. And again, it's, different manufacturers are different. So there's some that are higher quality and will have a longer lifespan. There's some that will have shorter lifespans. It seems that CDs that we burned like at home have shorter lifespans, whereas commercially manufactured CDs and DVDs seem to have longer lifespans. So this is, CDs and DVDs, while we used to consider them sort of long-term permanent-ish storage, these actually are not our friends in terms of long-term storage. So if you do have a lot of your collection on these formats, this is definitely something that you would want to do the importing work to bring it onto your hard drive or home laptop, because these are not long-term storage solutions. There's a question.
As I said earlier, I retired my Windows 7 computer within the last month, and a friend of mine explained about what he calls the spinning plates.
Yeah.
And everybody said when you buy a new computer nowadays to make sure to get solid state of the art.
Yeah. Yes.
Solid state.
So solid state,
that same problem.
solid state doesn't have that problem, and increasingly drives are solid state drives. So, but it's something that you would definitely, if you're buying an external drive, you would want to check whether it's a spinning drive or not. And solid state drives, I believe, are still more expensive, but it's possible that I'm behind on that. And there's another question.
So, well, related to that, then the solid states, would they have the same problem that if you didn't operate them, they might kind of freeze
That was
up?
my question.
Yeah, so they don't have the same
They don't have,
need for exercise, if you can say that about a
okay.
piece of equipment. So the next sort of storage device that we're going to discuss is flash memory devices. So we all have these, probably many of them, flash drives or memory or thumb drives. So these hold usually smaller quantities of data. We're probably not storing like large collections on them. And the main drawback of this as our storage device, in addition to being too small, is that they are really easy to lose. So if you have something important, it probably shouldn't only be on a thumb drive. And I've certainly talked to people who, last time I taught this workshop, someone in the audience had digitized all their family photos and kept them only on a thumb drive, which they were very worried about, so they kept in their purse and took with them everywhere, and then they lost their purse. So important things don't only exist on something that's really easy to lose.
Also, these should be labeled, because they all look alike at the end of the day.
Yes, they do all look alike. You never know what's on there. And then the last one that we're going to talk about, and this is not to say that these are the only options. These are the options that I think are most usable for us in our personal lives. The last is cloud storage. So I like to say that storing your content in the cloud is exactly the same as storing it on someone else's computer. The cloud is a computer somewhere else. So this is a very practical solution for many people. But again, we want to keep in mind that the services we're using to store this content, they are commercial services. They don't care about our content in the way we do. We might have an emotional or personal connection to the material we're storing, like our text messages or our photographs, but our cloud providers do not. And there certainly have been cases where there have been major data loss by cloud providers, or cloud providers that have shut down on short notice and deleted content. You might only have 7 days to get your content out. This is not to say that this is not a good or practical or realistic solution, but just to keep in mind that it is not necessarily that you want to put it there and never think about it again, because it is just as though you're putting it on someone else's computer. So you just want to maintain a relationship with that person and make sure you're paying attention to your content. Question?
One hesitation I have is that some of the stuff that I have, like interviews and stuff, is really personal, and I'm not sure I want it out where I don't have any control over it.
I think so. The question was about putting personal content on the cloud. So I think that's like a totally valid consideration, and that's something that you would want to probably do research about what cloud service you're using, what kind of risks exist if this personal content were accidentally made public by the provider. You know, it's unlikely, but we want to make, that's an example of the kind of informed decision that we would want to make.
Research that. Go to the library and ask the librarian to help you.
I would Google it, or go to the library and ask a librarian to help you.
Are these 8 examples up here basically the same thing, or versions of the same thing? Google Drive, Dropbox, are they all kind of the same thing?
I mean, they all work differently, but it is all the same idea that it's a computer somewhere else. And you can upload your content through the internet, but the content is being stored on a computer somewhere else.
Could you read those? I'm having trouble seeing those little clouds over there.
So I think the main big ones, I actually can't read them all either because it's a bit blurry, but Google Drive and Dropbox are sort of the main ones. And then there's also Amazon on there. A lot of people store their content on, particularly also museums, on Amazon Web Services. But I think, you know, regardless of how big these companies seem to us, or inevitable that they seem to us, this is, again, a case where we want to just do our due diligence and make sure that we're like remaining aware that our content is there, and that we want to be keeping an eye on it and aware of, you know, if they go out of business, we want to act quick and bring our content down and store it somewhere else.
I have a question. So this is opposed to, I use Carbonite. I use Carbonite to back up my whole drive. And what has been explained to me is that Carbonite doesn't exactly back up everything you have. It backs up the last edition you had.
So, I mean, I'm not, I don't think I can speak to the specifics of that particular service,
Right.
but so most backups work that they create like a full snapshot of everything on your computer, or however you set it up. Maybe you set it up to just back up like the photos from your phone. But it's not continually going back like once a day or once a week or once a month and creating another full snapshot. It is just looking at what's changed, and it's updated. It records those updates, but it's not doing a full snapshot.
Right.
And that's actually like to our benefit, because if it was doing a full snapshot, it would take much, much longer. So that is how that's accurate. That's how a backup works. We've talked about storage. So we sort of done the full circle of our 5 steps of personal digital archiving, and we're going to go into some other topics. So a lot of people, it sounds like, are digitizing their family photographs or audio or film. So I think we had an example already of a case where the format is essentially obsolete, so VHS. So we need to digitize those materials to view them in many cases, because most of us, for instance, don't have VHS players. They're also degrading over time. And another advantage to digitizing our material is we can copy and share them more easily than with our VHS. So I've included in your handout packet. We're not going to sort of go into it in detail, but I've included sort of the steps and recommended settings if you are digitizing photographs or documents. Those settings are all outlined in the worksheet and the main steps you'd want to take. And as I mentioned earlier, I've also included information if you want to digitize audio or video. So particularly if you're in Brooklyn, at the main branch of the Brooklyn Public Library, it's a central library. There's a section of the library called Info Commons. And you can go to Info Commons, and they have a setup where you can digitize your cassette tapes, record players, and VHS tapes. So they have all the equipment. You just have to bring your own hard drive to save the files, and they'll help set you up and teach you how to do it. So if it is something that you want to learn how to do, you can go there. I will say that when we digitize audio or video, the process happens in real time. So if you have, for instance, a 2-hour VHS tape, you'll have to sit there for 2 hours while it digitizes. So it is a time commitment. I've done it at BPL. I've digitized VHS, and I found it interesting and fun to learn how to do, and it's certainly like an excellent resource that's available to us for free. If you have like much more than you can do yourself, or you're not interested in it, I've also included in the handout a number of recommended vendors that are in sort of the region that you can work with, and you can email them and get a quote for how much it might cost to digitize whatever content you have.
So I'm really interested in this whole area. So if you use a vendor, what exactly are they doing if you send them the VHS? Explain to me what
It's exactly the same as if you went to the library. So the question is, what is a vendor doing? So they just have the equipment.
What do they do?
How do they give you the content? So you can tell them how you want the content. So you can, basically they will sit there with their equipment for the 2 hours and watch your tape digitize. And they can also do things to make sure they're getting as high a quality of possible digital version. And then you can ask them to mail you a hard drive. You can ask them to mail you CDs or DVDs. If it's only one file, they might be able to transfer it to you through Dropbox. But that's something where you should absolutely feel empowered to tell the vendor how you want to receive the materials.
something that, how long does the DVD last? Is that
The DVD is similar, it's optical media, so it's the same as like the CD. So if you're getting it on the video on the CD or DVD, you might not want to keep it there forever, but it's certainly a fine way for them to mail you the files.
ultimately it's good to get it onto a hard drive?
It's good to get it onto your computer. Yep.
The question is, why do you leave out iCloud? Is that the same as all the other clouds?
Oh, I think
Is that the same?
it wasn't an intentional.
I just wanted to know.
It's the same idea.
Same way.
Yep.
Right.
It seems like there's a lot of questions. There's just a couple more slides, so I think maybe we'll hold the questions till then. So yes, digitizing photographs, audio, and film. There's lots of resources in the handout. In addition to the steps for digitization and the vendor information, also in the recommended readings and the links for further information, there's lots more information about doing that work. And then finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about social media, just in case anyone is interested in saving that content. So we like to say that these platforms are really good for sharing our material, but they're not archives. So an example that I use for this is if we upload our photographs to Facebook, we saw earlier how our cameras are including all that really great metadata and information about our photographs. So when we upload our photo to Facebook, they strip all that out, they throw it away. So if we went back to Facebook and downloaded the photograph, we wouldn't have any of that information. We wouldn't know when it was taken, the time, the date, what camera was used. We wouldn't know any of that. So again, great for sharing, not great for storing. So I've included a few of the main platforms that people might use and how to access your content on them. So from Facebook, you can download, it allows a download of your full account, which is really everything. In Google, if you use Google Calendar, Email, or Drive, or any other Google products, there's a service called Google Takeout. And this allows you to download content from different parts of your Google accounts. If you use Twitter, you can export your tweets to a spreadsheet. It also allows an export to something called a JSON file, which is probably, it's what developers use. And then Instagram, so Instagram doesn't allow any download options, but there are some apps, if you Google, that allow you to download individual photos, but it doesn't have the same sort of functionality like Facebook where you can download everything. So finally, just last steps. So I think it already came up, the idea that we want to often maintain this content in a long-term way. So what are some steps we can do to create our family archives that will last beyond us? So first of all, organizing and describing them will help everyone understand what those materials are and provide access to them in the future. Engaging your family or other people who care about the material is a way of allowing your project to live beyond you. And then again, you can also consider donating your materials to archives. So you might want to consider somewhere like CGH, Historical Society, Public Library in your community. You might have a community-based archive, and then there's also universities or places that could be interested. So in this case, you would want to think about what your collection is, where there might be connections to different kinds of institutions that would be interested in your materials, and then you would approach those institutions with a description of what you have and engage in a conversation with them about whether it's a good fit. So that is sort of that. We'll get to some of these questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I think.
Use the microphone, please. Oh.
I want to know whether Brooklyn Public Library is the only one that will transfer from the VHS to.
So I believe that the Queens Public Library, the Central Branch in Jamaica, also has that service, but I don't think that NYPL does.
Thank you.
Does the library, is the library able to digitize 8mm film?
I don't think so. So the question was 8, oh, yeah,
Okay.
got a mic.
If you have an old machine that can play the VHS, can you create a digital version yourself by connecting that to the computer?
So you can buy your own, like online, you can buy a digital converter that you can plug into your VCR and into your computer.
And that would be the same quality as the commercial ones?
I think if you went, it's probably not going to be as good quality, but it would depend on how much money you spent. Yeah.
I have a huge slide collection and years of teaching. How do I digitize those?
So I think in the handout, is there a, I think I included a suggested resolution for digitizing slides.
Right, but then what
So
do you do?
it's pretty much the same as a photograph, except that you'll need to make sure, like if you're using a home scanner, you might want to just, especially if you haven't bought one yet and you're thinking about buying one, some home scanners can't handle slides because they require such high resolution because the content is packed into a tiny area. So if you are going to buy a scanner to do it, you would just want to make sure that you're buying a scanner that specifically says that it scans slides as one of its features.
And then once you scan it, then you can use that.
You can use it just like a, just like a photograph. Yep.
I don't know if this is still true, but it was at least at one time true that you have an option when you're scanning slides. You can scan an individual slide, or you can scan a bunch of them at a time, except if you do that, a bunch of them at a time, what you get is the image of all
No,
12
that's
of them. So if you're interested in an individual image, you have to scan that individual. Without
Yeah, I
You can
think it
save them
depends.
separately.
Yeah, so if you're,
if you do it 12 at a time.
Yeah, you can-
Save it separately.
many scanners now come with sort of a plastic,
Yes.
I don't know,
A carrot.
a frame that you can insert multiple slides into and scan them all at once, and they'll save each slide as a separate file.
That's wonderful.
I think there's a question back here.
I have a question about giving your collection to Evo or whatever. So on what basis do you make them feel or convince them that it's valuable? If it's, for instance, my family history, I mean, I have some people that are semi-famous and blah, blah, blah. But most of the people are, Yin Funagancio, regular old people.
So, I mean, that is the question of being an archivist. How do we make those decisions? So every archive or institution is going to have basically a mission statement of what kinds of material that they collect. And they're going to use that to guide whether your collection is a good fit for them. So where I work at Brooklyn Historical Society, we collect Brooklyn, which is kind of everything. Obviously, we can't take everything that's related to Brooklyn because we only have one small building. So we have, in our mission statement, we've identified a number of areas where we're sort of really interested in building out those collections. And so we really try to prioritize accepting collections that sort of meet those topical guidelines. So it's really just having a conversation with the staff at the institution.
And I just want to add that here at Center for Jewish History, all of our partner institutions do collect lots of family collections from regular folks. You don't have to have celebrities in your family.
Even if you don't know the names of the people in the photos.
Well, that's a conversation you'll have to have with the archivists who are managing these collections. But
Shows pictures in 1920s and 30s Europe that in the world it doesn't exist, but sometimes I don't know who they are.
okay, well, maybe you have some that are. If you find some that are, just the mixed pronouns.
You may know the place. You may know the place.
It might be a place that don't have a lot of photographs. So I mean, it really varies. Oh, here.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, as far as scanners are concerned, I have a scanner that does either it has a script to do either 35 millimeter or slides. But one thing I've also discovered, when you have large format negatives, they won't go into that. I discovered the way to do it is to do it and reverse it. Do it as if you're doing a regular photograph, but you can reverse it to do a negative of the negative, and it'll come out as a good positive. The other thing is, if you have a format I took some old photographs and scanned them many years ago, and I don't know where the original photographs are, but they're very valuable photographs to me. I went to a skating show and took wonderful photographs of the skaters. But they were in a format that is not used anymore. It was an old Adobe format. It was called Adobe Light and whatever it was. I went online and Googled, and there are free things that you can download to transfer them to other formats. So check it out before you get rid of everything.
That's a great suggestion.
I have relatives who were champions in their field. Like my uncle was a handball champion in 1937 in New York State. So the question is, I was thinking of donating, material related to him to Yivo. But he was also from Brooklyn. Now, how do you make the decision?
Let them compete.
I mean, I'm serious about that because you just mentioned this, and
I mean, I think it's really sort of a decision that you would make. I think things you could think about are well, one, what's important to you? Like, is it important to you for the collection to be in one place versus another? Because that's certainly very important. And then you might also want to think about where people are going. Like, if someone's interested in researching that, are they likely to come here, or are they likely to go to Brooklyn? Because you want to think about, where the collection will get used and be sort of like
Well, I just
a sports museum.
I want
Yeah.
I just decided and listening to you.
May I just suggest
Yes.
something? As a researcher, I would tell you, look up on internet who is working on the subject. If somebody is working on Jews in sports, for instance, it might be interesting to contact this person and to decide together with the person where the archive can go and where the researcher can access it. Because for you, what is important is that somebody will use this archive, I think.
Yes, I think as you're talking, I'm going to give it to Hivo because no, seriously, because I was here when I saw the Jews in sports,
Yes.
and they had boxers and wrestlers.
Mm-hmm.
But my uncle was a handball player.
Okay.
You know, my aunt was a bowler. You know, and so I said, okay, it'll be here. What?
You're urban. I mean, if you grew up in cities with very little space, handball and bowling.
Yes.
Well, the rest of the Jews played basketball. It was an urban sport.
Right.
They didn't do things without having big fields.
Yeah. It's interesting. Thank you.
As a retired archivist, one of the things I would suggest when you are talking to a repository about donating it, if you have several candidates, if you have one, go for it. If you have several, one question to ask is, how can they give you an estimate of how long it would take for them to either process or describe the collection? Because if, a repository may take it in, but if they haven't put a description of it, if they haven't even created a description of it, or if they have a description of it and it's not, say, on their website, then people can't find it. So, and alas, archives are always underfunded. They don't have enough people, so you have to keep your expectations fairly low. But it is a question that you should ask. That's a question.
I think there's a question back there,
So, I used to live across the street from this building, and now I live across the street from the Brooklyn Public Library, so I'm very happy. So this is my question. At home, I've got a VHS to CD player,
Mhm.
but it sounds from tonight's talk as if it's a waste of time for me to convert VHS to CD and then first install it on my computer, the CDs, as opposed to getting a link that would go directly? Is that the better way to go?
I wouldn't suggest keeping them on the CDs forever, but if it's working for you to convert your VHS onto CDs, it seems easy enough for you to put the CDs in the computer and copy those or files. It's definitely an extra step. But if it's equipment you already have, it seems
Just
worth
do it.
using. Yeah.
Okay, and also there's a format called mini DV.
Yes.
It lasts
Yes, there
terribly
is.
long, but I have them.
Yeah.
Do you know if that exists in libraries or?
You should go on the Info Commons website. I don't remember off the top of my head.
I've got a copy
Mini
of that
Mini DV is one of, it's like relatively common, so I think it's possible they might have it, but I just don't remember off the top of my head.
And otherwise consult with those commercial vendors.
Definitely.
Okay, one more question. No, I'm free.
Oh. I see someone back. in terms of categorizing and organizing, if you have old photos and you don't know who these people are, but you're hoping that somebody in the family might realize who somebody is there any way of categorizing a photo like that?
Unknown.
I think, there would still be lots of information that you might know about that photo, even if you don't know the people. You might know where it is, you might know when it is, even if you don't know the exact year, you might know the decade. So I think thinking about what information you do know about the item can be a way that you categorize it and share it with your family to try and get more of that descriptive information.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.